Captain Jack here. Today we're looking at more NES games that were released during the console's original life cycle that you probably haven't heard of before for one reason or another. The link to part 1 is in the description in case you want to watch that one first. Or you can be a diva and watch that one after this. You know, I don't care. It's not making me mad. Guerrilla War is a port of an SNK arcade game, and it's very easy to tell. It's by far one of the most bombastic run-and-gun games on the system, making other ports like Ikari Warriors look downright tame in comparison. The action is absolutely nuts here, with incredible flicker all the way through. You're blasting through the jungles of Cuba as Che Guevara, and back in Japan, the game was just called Guevara. The problem is the island is heavily fortified, and it will take your expert shooting and your NES turning into a blow dryer to save Cuba. There's plenty of weapons to help you along the way, and they're just as bombastic as the game's setting. From Agent Orange to an elephant gun that has bullets that have bullets. Yeah, try to wrap your head around that riddle. In typical SNK fashion, the game is littered with short, fast levels with mini-bosses, bosses, and maybe a few more bosses before the end of the level. They can range from seemingly a bulletproof man, a giant tank, to just a billion people pouring out of a submarine. There's also plenty of tanks just laying around that you can hop into, revealing how destructive the environment is. The game has a simple, clear art style, which is very useful as it can be kind of hard to tell what's going on sometimes. I would say something about the music, but you really can't hear it over the constant gunfire. It's a game that's intensity has made it age like fine wine. North and South is a war simulation of the American Civil War, which definitely makes it stand out. It's highly customizable too. There's a lot of options here for an 80s console game. You can add weather effects, European ships, foreign adversaries. You can even pick which year you're fighting in, which affects the battlefield. As for the actual map you play in, it's kinda like a board game. You want to capture as many territories as possible, and clearing the enemy off the board nets you a win. The train is also super important, and you'll need at least 2 towns on the rail line to collect currency, which will eventually net you new armies. As for the armies, if you collide with units of the opposing side, you'll get into a fight, which is surprisingly intuitive. You'll have cannons, soldiers, and cavalry, which you can switch between at the press of a button. I'd almost always use the horses, as their speed makes up for their terrible attack power. It's a pretty detailed battlefield, with horses running off on their own and cannons leaving little potholes wherever they shoot. Even buildings can crumble from cannon fire. Which brings me to another thing. There's a lot of polish in weird places in this game. From the bizarrely fancy pause screen to this nice little paragraph. If you win the game, hey, this side. Alright, thank you. Or there's my favorite. Picking a human opponent will give you that side's respective battle anthem. But making it a computer gives you a computerized version of that anthem. When capturing an important fort, you'll have to do this platforming section where you have to make it to the end to raise your flag before the time runs out. Enemy soldiers will try to stop you on the way. It's a fine minigame, but what's with all the knives? It's the Civil War, didn't they have guns? North and South is a fascinating game about one of the more underutilized parts of American history. And honestly, it's probably one of the more approachable American Civil War games. Vice Project Doom is like a tie-in to an 80s movie that was never made. The intro level has you blasting away at things in a car driving through the night, and after the first boss, you're brought to the title screen. Yeah, there's an intro level to the game's title screen. That's when you know it's gonna be good. You'd think the whole game would be car-related, but it's actually a platformer. It controls absolutely great. There's even a different running animation if you hold diagonally down. Like, there's no reason it's here other than that it looks cool. There's 3 weapons to pick from. A sword, which is the quickest and great at short ranges, a gun, which is medium ranged, and a bomb, which is hard to aim but deals massive long range damage. The gun and the bomb have an ammo count, so you'll have to keep that in mind. Usually you'll stick to the sword. Vice Project Doom is a very ambitious game. It came out at the tail end of the NES's life cycle, which explains why it's rarely, if ever, talked about. It's a very story-driven game with several cinematics between and within the levels. They look great, and the blue and orange shadows really complement each other well. The story is about, aliens or something. Who cares? The art looks great. The levels have a grimy look to them and have some of the most beautiful backgrounds you'll ever see in an NES game. From a beautifully detailed nighttime skyline to a complex parallax effect on the train level. The pacing in the levels is extremely brisk, with several changes of scenery within a single stage. Sometimes the game really throws you a curveball, like when all of a sudden there's a shooting gallery section, which actually plays a lot better than you'd think. The enemies in the levels range from standard to bizarre. There's plenty of generic robo-baddies to blast away at, but then there's pogo stick ninjas, acupuncture patients. If you want to try a top-notch NES game that just never got its chance in the spotlight, check out Vice Project Doom. Jackal is a military shooter that has you roaming around the countryside in a jeep blasting away at enemies. You might think you'll be at a disadvantage being in a big vehicle, but the game's controls more than make up for it. The two weapons serve very different purposes. The grenade will be lobbed in the direction you're facing, but the bullets will always shoot forward, allowing you to have a sort of strafing action. The stages here are huge and can scroll in both directions. They range from ancient Rome, industrial shipyards, to swampy canyons. There's a couple of other things you'll want to do while making your way through these levels. Blasting away at warehouses will reveal friendly soldiers you can rescue and drop off at helipads for points. Sometimes though, the warehouse will give you a glowing super soldier that upgrades your bombs instead. The bomb can be upgraded 3 times until it's eventually a missile that can shoot out flames in 4 directions. The flames do literally just as much damage as a direct hit, and the game becomes a breeze while you have this. The only downside to Jackal are the bosses. There's a huge impressive tank at the end, sure, but the bosses until you get to that point are usually just 4 of something you've already encountered in the level, like these 4 beefy tanks or 4 fire-breathing statues. Once you blow them up, you're just like, huh, I guess the adventure's really more in the journey in this game. I forgot to mention, this game also has 2-player multiplayer. Jackal is just a very impressive package that is consistent all the way through. Little Samson is one of the most remarkable platformers on the NES, seriously. The only reason you haven't heard of it before is because of that 1992 release date, which almost single-handedly relegated this game to obscurity. You'll start off with 4 different characters to pick from, with a level showing off their particular strengths. There's the mouse that can climb walls and lay bombs, the golem that has the most health and can't be hurt by spikes, the dragon who can hover and shoot the farthest, and lastly, Little Samson. I love how the game forces you to figure out each character's powers on your own. For example, once you reach this wall in Little Samson's level, you're forced to figure out that he can wall jump. I mean, he can also wall climb and ceiling climb, but I didn't figure this out till the end of the game, so there's going to be no footage of that from this point on. Once you complete the 4 levels, your heroes meet, and you join forces to destroy the 4 evil wizards scattered across the land. The levels are expertly designed, and the ability to quickly switch between characters adds so much strategy to the game. You can quickly fly through the level as the dragon, take damage as the golem, run up a vertical shaft as the mouse, take damage as the golem, fight a boss with Little Samson, take damage as the golem. But seriously, every character has their use. Even the golem. Little Samson by far has the most standard controls, and combined with his decent weapon and decent health, it makes him a decent character. He's kinda like picking Mario in any Nintendo sports title ever. He's right in the middle, not doing anything fancy. You might think the mouse is good for small passageways, but his real secret is the boss fights. His bombs by far do the most damage of the full animation plays, and it works great on slow-moving enemies like bosses. Seriously, it doesn't matter who it is. Giant swamp monster? He's got it. Diamond-plated knight? He's got that too. The enemies are inherently more or less difficult depending on which character you use. These little flying guys are easy for the dragon, but the old trusty golem? Yeah, it's a little bit harder for him. Great character, by the way. The game is extremely impressive graphically, and just by how varied everything is. Its more cartoony art style has definitely made it age better than most. If you've already played Kirby's Adventure, this is the right follow-up game to that. Little Samson is by far the best forgotten NES platformer, and you should give it a try even if you're not a big fan of this type of game. I really can't think of a negative thing to say about the game. Golem.